welcome to episode 173 of AviaDev Insight Africa, the podcast offering a window to the world of African aviation with your host, John Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. Today, I am joined by Moses Ngwanah, the Chief Operations Officer at GS Aviation over in Madagascar, the beautiful treasure island of Madagascar, where AviaDev Africa will take place, I promise, sooner rather than later. Moses originally hails from Cameroon. He's got vast experience working for both Camair-Co and ASKY over in Togo as well. And Moses and I began chatting last year. He was involved in a couple of really interesting webinars, and his passion and his knowledge of the industry and his passion for Africa to really develop itself and reach its potential was really obvious. So we started talking, and Moses has recently released an article that he was kind enough to share with me and share with his network, talking all about why and how Africa needs to come together and basically find some common ground in terms of taking aviation forwards. The link to read this article will be in the show notes, but this is kind of a deeper conversation into the findings, and it will be sort of complemented by that article itself. So it's that article we're going to discuss today. So welcome to the podcast, Moses. Great to have you.
Hi, John. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
It's always a pleasure to have this kind of discussions, especially to talk about things in the African air transport sector, a sector that I'm very passionate about and a sector that I want to see grow in Africa. And so thank you, and I hope we are going to have a very interesting discussion to see why we are where we are today and to look for opportunities that we can make things better for Africa.
Absolutely. So you talked about that passion that you've got. So tell us about that first and foremost. You know, how did we get here? How did you get here to want to write something like this and to really sort of try and sort of shake the tree a little bit? You know, where did your passion for the development of aviation in Africa come from?
Okay. First of all, my passion for aviation can be traced back when I was still a kid. I used to admire the industry so very much. And when I grew up and graduated from university and had to start working, I was lucky enough and fortunate to start working in Cameroon Airlines Corporation. And I was also fortunate to have had some very interesting industry senior executives who helped me a lot understand the industry better and how it functions, the structure, the organization of the industry. And with that, I knew with some basic knowledge of economics, the importance of transport to the economy of any country. And so looking at air transport, I already understood how important it could be to the economic growth of Africa. And so I was passionate about pushing Camair-Co and the airlines industry as a whole to be that vector of pushing the economy of Africa. But unfortunately, I discovered that there were a lot of speed breaks with this. And one of the reasons why there were speed breaks was because I discovered that each country was not working under a kind of unified structure that could ease the process of getting certifications, getting licenses, or operating opportunities. And as a result, I'm from Cameroon, from the Central African sub-region, and just your neighboring countries, if you have to do something in the air transport sector, you still need validation from the different countries. And I thought that if in Africa we could come together and do these things, simplify it and make it better, it would be easier for us. And this was further pushed forward when we had to apply for TCO, the third country operator, under the European Union, of course, with EASA. We discovered that there was just one organ who was responsible for these activities. Instead of going through the different CAAs, probably in France, in the UK, in Germany, and all of that, you just had to apply to EASA and everything was done. And I just thought, why would Africa not do this? Especially that Africa lacks, at the level of individual countries, they don't have the resources enough to implement standard safety principles and all the ICAO annexes. So it would have been interesting for Africa if Africa was capable of having a unique regulatory organ that can help most African countries and the most operators to just adhere to and then make the operations easier and faster. So that's where I developed that passion, and I thought that as an individual, I can contribute my little act to this to see how things can move forward.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating article, and we'll get into the meat of it in a minute. But you talk about the differences between what the European, EASA does and what Africa does on a much more fragmented basis. What is it?
Yes.
Why are we fragmented in Africa? Why? What does this all come down to? And why are we in the position that we're in? Because it's not because it's easy, is it? Because it's obviously making it very difficult and slow to get the industry moving. If, like you say, every time you need traffic rights, you've got to apply and you've got to wait and you've got to go through all these different protocols depending on the different countries. So as an African, tell me why we're in this position and why there hasn't been a move to this sooner.
Thank you. A very tricky question there, John. But there is no single reason as to why Africa is this fragmented. But there are a couple of reasons that if you put them together, you would understand why this is so real in Africa. And just to put it into perspective, it's not just about the air transport sector that is fragmented. If you go even to the health sector, it's the same thing. If you go even to immigration issues, it's the same thing. Politically, it's the same thing, because Africa is a unique continent. By size, Africa is one of the biggest continents in the world and has 55 countries registered under the African Union. And it's a continent that is plagued with a lot of conflicts, a lot of economic hardship. And with that put together, it's difficult for some African countries to come together and work things out. And the umbrella organization of the African continent, which is the African Union, does not have the financial muscle to do certain things that they may want to do, irrespective of how wonderful their ideas are, irrespective of how important and how they can push the economies of Africa to move. They don't have the capacity to implement them. And if we look at this, there are about 5 different reasons we can single out. And of course, one of the first reasons is political. The political organization of every system determines how every other thing comes in. And most African countries, they have looked at the air transport sector as a domain of sovereignty. And being a domain of sovereignty, they keep it to the politicians to manage. And as a result, they have it so close to their hearts, and they cannot just give that power of that domain to another organ, let's say a suprastate organization. So they kind of hold it so close to them. And as it is, you now have every country now thinks that they can have their own civil aviation authority, which is normal, of course. But the civil aviation authorities that they have do not have the capacity, let alone even the ability to implement what they want to implement. Secondly, we can also look at the historical past of Africa. You would agree with me that most African countries are just about 60 years old today or so. But that is not where the problem is. The problem is that there are some social and cultural differences in Africa that come into play when some major decisions have to be taken. And linguistically, you see that some African countries use Arab as their main language, some French, some English, some Portuguese, some Spanish, etc., etc. And so sometimes it's difficult to bring these people together and all Africans and tell them, look, it's true, we are Africans and we want to grow. It's also true that we have different languages, but let's adopt 1, 2, 3, or 4 languages as the main language for us to move forward. You would always have some of those countries that would feel that no, it should be their language, and others the other way around. And just to add to that, you also know that Africa, right at independence, Africa was mostly divided into 2. The northern part of Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, northern part being Arabic and sub-Saharan being who we are today. And this already, when you have division, it's always difficult for people to come back together and think forward. And also, if we look at the economies of Africa, economically, most African countries don't have the same capacity. There are always the bigger boys and the smaller boys in Africa. And sometimes when there's a wonderful idea, some of these other countries, especially if they don't have the economic capacity, they feel that giving in is supporting the bigger countries to grow. You see, sometimes they think, okay, if we have a unique rule-making organ, they are going to make the rules and it's going to favor, for example, Ethiopian Airlines because they are the big boys. And a small country that is somewhere would think, when would we be able to have an airline that will be as competitive as them? And this, I always look at it and it makes me laugh. It's like two bald-headed people fighting over a comb, because it's not because you're going to open up that some other person would win and you would not. It's a win-win thing because the market forces would determine the way things grow. And if you apply the basic principles of a market-oriented economy, then every country is going to benefit from this. And then lastly, it's the orientation even of the rules in Africa. The orientations are different. Each country has adopted their own kind of orientation. And there are two main orientations that most African countries have used, either the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration of the USA, or EASA from the European Union. And so each of them have developed their regulations in line with their standards. In fact, most of it is a copy-paste, I must say. They just copied and they pasted and they're using it. And so sometimes to bring them back into one thing and say, look, come on, yes, you're using your regulations oriented towards the 14 CFR, that's from the US, or from EASA, but together we can find a middle ground and build something that is adapted to the African reality, and that is also going to help us to be competitive. Because as I said, or let me say it again, it will be difficult for operators in Africa to be competitive if they don't have a strong regulatory organ behind them that gives them the opportunity for them to excel. So
lots
and
lots to talk about. So I think there's a real good overview there of the challenges. And I think that what you've set out there, which is really, really, we're not starting from zero here. There are some that are quite developed. There are some countries with their aviation infrastructure or with their population or with their middle class and their GDP per capita. We're not all starting at a level playing field. So there will be winners and losers, or in the short term winners. And to your point about Ethiopian Airlines and countries that say, well, we want what they've got. I mean, with all due respect, it's 75 plus years old. It's taken a long time. It could have failed multiple times. It didn't happen overnight. They didn't set up the airline last week and then have success.
Exactly.
So, it's a shining light for sure, but you have to have patience and you have to also have the right models, etc. And that's, we're not necessarily talking about, the airlines today. It's more about the regulation and the legislation around it. So the big question to get into the meat of the article is, how do we do it? First and foremost, let's talk about how we do it before who does it. But how do we go about getting something that's a little more Pan-African and as fair as possible, which makes it easier for operators in Africa to be able to operate, and for non-African operators to come in a fair basis and to operate as well?
Yeah, thank you again, John. I think it's possible for Africa to do it, and it just needs the political commitment and the will of decision makers in Africa to push this process to go through. The rule-making exercise is a standard. We are not reinventing the wheel. It's not something new. It's something that has existed elsewhere. We can take experience from other areas of the world, adapt them, and restructure them to meet our own realities. And given the way Africa is, we can use 3 routes to get there if we want to. Because in order to have a fair and equitable representation of every country, and also to make something that is acceptable by every country in Africa, we can use these 3 routes. First of all, we may want to use the system of regionalism, which means that Africa is divided into so many different sub-regions. You have the SADC, which is for Southern Africa. You have ECOWAS in West Africa, and all of that. And these regional organizations already exist like an economic bloc, which means that they have a custom union, trade agreements, and so many things, visa facilitation, and all of that. And because they already have some of these advantages, if they can just push the aspect of the rulemaking in the civil aviation sector to that top level and adopt it, it will go a long way to help them. And now when this happens within these regions and they start working, which means that if you take a region like ECOWAS, and they have a standard regulatory organ that has the capacity to enforce and implement the rules that they have made, and it will be easier for them to work this out. And if that starts working in ECOWAS, in SADC, and in other regions, first of all, we would have solved the problem of fragmentation of 55 different states. Now we would have maybe just about 5 or 6 regions that already have regulations. And now these regions can now come together in the long run, because this thing, it's not an overnight thing. It wouldn't just come overnight. It's something that we have to be patient. We have to apply a strategy that will be long-term. And with that, at some moment, when these regions would have developed what they have, then they can come together and then build something that can be used at the continental level. One of the biggest advantages of using the regional blocks would be that because most of them have a central bank or they have a financial institution that controls the economies within these areas, it's easy for them to push forward the idea of having one rule-making organ. And you cannot beat something with nothing. So you need to come in with something. And so with the financial institutions that have the financial muscles and the power to negotiate with most of these countries, it will be easier for them to push these things through. That's at the regional level. Now we can also use our multilateral organizations, that is the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and of course with the support of IATA and other organs, under the umbrella of AFCAC, which is the African Civil Aviation Commission, working with the AU, to push together most African countries to come under this. And of course, this has to pass through the Pan-African Parliament, because that is the legislative organ of the African Union. They have to legislate on this, give AFCAC some capacities, some powers that are above what they have as of now. Because the powers of AFCAC cannot do anything to the African Civil Aviation Organization. They can only propose. And if you can only propose, what that happens is people can accept your propositions or they will not. And when people don't, then it's difficult for you to move forward. And that's why they've been there for years. And they have proposed very wonderful initiatives, but most of them are still lying in many drawers. I'll just give you a simple example, is the Yamoussoukro Agreement that was signed more than 40 years ago. And till date, most countries or some countries still haven't implemented it. And there's no way to enforce it because neither AFCAC or the African Union or any organ has the capacity to tell a country B that, look, you have to implement this agreement that was signed. And so you need the Pan-African Parliament to work with the African Union, empower the African Civil Aviation Commission, and then with the support of multilateral organizations like ICAO, IATA, and all of that to push the process forward. I would just add that if you would remember, sometimes in, I think 2011 or 2012, most African countries convened in Abuja, civil aviation authorities, and they had the Abuja Declaration. And the Abuja Declaration was that by 2015, almost every operator in Africa should be certified with IOSA, which is the IATA safety program. There's one thing that is fundamental that I want to underline here. They understand the importance of safety and having a common standard. That you cannot take it away. So all the civil aviation authorities understand that it is important to have a common standard that everybody adheres to. And so they use the IATA standards to work with the ISM. So, which means that they are conscious that it is important and necessary for them to upgrade from having these fragmented regulations that are different into a unique organ that can produce and have the same standards for everybody to work with. And then the last or the third route is we can work using the approach that the European Union used or the European countries use sometimes, which means that some big African countries can come together, countries that already have a track record of safety, of civil aviation regulations and all of that come together, build a union or a kind of organization or an association, just like with the Joint Aviation Authority that was done by the European counterparts, build this together, work together and say, look, amongst these countries, A, B, C, D, we have agreed that we would have this organ that will be responsible for this. Of course, they are not going to give all the rules to this organ. You can just give some, because there are others that probably it will still be important for some countries to manage. Of course, that's true. And so when this organ starts working, and these African countries that have decided to belong to start doing well, it is obvious that other countries now would admire them or would see what they are doing and then would maybe tend to work towards them. And this now will be easy to transition it from a private initiative and take it now to the African Union through the Pan-African Parliament to legislate it and then make it a standard operation for Africans to use. And for that to happen, these three routes, we can use them, but then it will not just go overnight. It's something that we have to, I'm proposing that we are using a two-tier kind of approach. The first one is just to work initially with most civil aviation authorities, build a common code for certifications that would help operators within Africa to have a simple, structured, and organized process for certifications, be it for aircraft, for crewmen, for air traffic control, navigation organizations, whatsoever, just one unique coding system. The advantage with this is most African countries who don't have the capacity to, let's say, certify an aircraft would easily adhere to this one. Because if we have an organ that has the capacity now to certify aircraft or to certify certain things, it's easier. And also for personnel, imagine instead of having a B1 license as an engineer from Cameroon or from Togo, from Cote d'Ivoire, you have an AFCA B1 license, which means you can work in every African country with your license, just like an EASA license for a pilot. You just show your EASA license and you're fine. And if we can grow to this level, because most African countries will see the benefits directly, and that will push them maybe to adhere to this. And also, the second part of it is that, when you start small, you gain experience, and when you succeed, you're motivated to move forward. And then it's easier because you see the objectives in front of you and you can attain them. Rather than starting with a whole complex thing that is so big and people don't see light at the end of the tunnel because it's so complex, it's a lot of codes, a lot of so many things. But if you start small, people will be motivated, and when they get it done, then they can move now to the second stage. So when we finish with this, a certification codes that we can have, then we'll move now to the second level. That is when we can now use all the 19 annexes of the International Civil Aviation Authority, develop them and develop standards for implementation and acceptable means of compliance for African countries. And of course, with that opportunity that each country can readapt the means of compliance to their realities, because the realities are not the same. That we should be conscious of it.
So it's proving, I guess what we're saying, what I really like about your approach is it's proving that collaboration is the way forward. And if you do that with something not simple, but very simple to understand, like a safety or a qualifications sort of a benchmark, that's a much easier thing to put in place, to show everyone you're on board. We've got this uniform thing. Once you've done that, then you could talk about SATAM and the wider, that's a way more complicated project in a way than just getting people a uniform sort of safety and security system in place. And also there could be advocacy. Once you see the successes, you bring other people in, as you say, but also that body as a whole can then go to get those qualifications, those certifications recognized by FAA and EASA. So they become interchangeable and it just becomes simplified instead of the countries doing it on a fragmented basis. And I think that, the other point that you made is absolutely correct, which is if we sit here 33 years since Yamoussoukro was signed and say, we need everybody on board before we can go, we're going to be sat here forever. You need to be able to say, right, who's ready? You know, out of those 35 countries that have signed the SATAM, and I think, you know, 18, 20, whatever the number is that's actually signed a memorandum of implementation, are we going? Are we on? Because they need to start to move, show the success, and then others will join on as they see the success. And I think that it's then about communicating the benefits and getting these states to say to the other states, you guys should be involved in this because it is the way forward. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is the way we've been all up to now doesn't work. So you've got to do something different, right? You know, you've got to change it. Otherwise, you know, as Einstein said, stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. You're not going to get a different result. So we have an opportunity now to restart. I think just to pick up on one point that you said, is that doesn't the structure already exist in that, as you mentioned, you've got the African Union, you've got AFCAC, but is the fundamental difference that in Europe, the European Union is actually legislative and EASA is legislative, whereas the AU and AFCAC is more advisory? Is that not the problem here, that they don't have enough power to be able to implement through direction?
Absolutely, yes. The structure already exists. And in Africa, not only do we have AFCAC, which is which is under the African Union, we also have AFRA, which is an association of operators in Africa. So yes, the structure exists, the institutions are there, but the problem is that these institutions do not have the capacity to move the objectives that they have, or to move forward how do I put it? They don't have the capacity to ensure that what they are thinking or what they are working out can be implemented, because there are so many reasons why. First of all, the African Union is still using AFCAC still like an advisory body. Okay, they have to move AFCAC from an advisory body to a body that has the capacity to implement and work out things that they want. And also, AFRA has to also upgrade a little bit. AFRA is wonderful in what they are doing, but I think that if they stay just with what they are doing as of now, they may not have that power of negotiation, because they have the opportunity that they represent most of the operators in Africa. They have links with government, they have links with IATA, with the International Civil Aviation Authority. But they have to transform this into something that is beneficial to the African air transport sector by providing some specific things. Let me just go back to the Joint Aviation Authority. When the Joint Aviation Authority was created, yes, as a Joint Aviation Authority to create and make rules, that was good, but the people who were behind this project understood that you need to make the Joint Aviation Authority move one step further. And so they created a Joint Aviation Training Organization, which now was very important in pooling. It acted like a pull factor to bring people on board. And then when the people were on board, of course, if you see the benefits, then you would easily adhere to it. So I think that the structures already exist in Africa, the institutions are there, but just that they lack the resources, they lack the political powers to implement what they have to. And as a result, we are here still, like you said, about 33 years, the Yamoussoukro agreement is not totally implemented in Africa. And if we continue like this, then we're still going to continue for so many other years. So I think it's time to look at it from a different perspective, that those who are willing and those who are capable, we can start something. And of course, the goal is that if we collaborate, we would win more. And so I think the most important thing is for the African Union to empower the African Civil Aviation Commission through the Pan-African Parliament, support it financially, and give it the capacity to implement all the objectives that they have, and hold countries accountable if they don't respect the standards that they have put in place.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, as we said, this isn't about picking on anybody, because the great thing is, I mean, I was there for the signing of the SATAM, all those, not that many years ago, 3-4 years ago, at the African Union. And alongside that, you've got these other protocols like the Continental Free Trade Area, the free movement of people. They all actually, if you strip it back, be it aviation or trade or tourism or whatever, they're all trying to do the same thing, which is encourage Africa to trade and travel more within Africa, rather than always looking to outside of the continent. And that is the only way forward, because of the demographic dividend, the young people that we have in Africa, the fact that it's landlocked, the fact that there's so much development to be made. And these initiatives, if successful, are going to make a massive difference to the future of the continent. The challenge is, how do you make them successful? So it seems to me that the Continental Free Trade Area is a bit further ahead. So there may be some learnings from what they've done and what they've experienced and the challenges they've had that we could pass into the aviation. And these guys need to talk together. So whoever's heading up the free movement of people, and I don't know who that is. I know that the Secretariat for the Continental Free Trade Area is in Accra. AFCAC is over in Senegal, but I don't know who's doing the free movement of people, whether that's in Addis at the African Union. It will be really interesting, but those guys need to work together, because we're all interdependent here, in the same way that actually now we have these health challenges. We need a Pan-African approach to how are we going to handle health protocols, because that's another one. You need a visa to come from one country to another. What health protocols are you going to need to meet to be able to travel from one country to another? And if you systemize, unify, and work together on this, it just makes it easier for the average person to be able to move, to be able to trade, to be able to fly. And that's the big aim here. We need to put individual interests aside and sort of say, look, yes, we're not all starting from the same level, but we'll all benefit from this in the long run. Just go with it, because the alternative is you're going to operate in a silo, operate on your own, and you're just going to continue to struggle, potentially, unless you are already one of those big powers up there as well. So the big question, you touched on it a little bit there, but who's in charge of this? Where do we go next? And how is it funded? Like, what are your ideas on that? Because that will be one of the first questions everybody asks.
Yeah. Who is in charge? There is no other person except the African Union, because the African Union is the umbrella organization of the African continent. And the African Union, just like you mentioned before, have a lot of objectives that they have set forward for Africa. One of it is to improve intra-African trade. One of it is to improve migration within Africa, or movement within Africa from country A to country B, and so many of these objectives. But most of these objectives cannot be realized if we don't put the fundamentals right. Okay, let's take the Continental Free Trade Agreement that we have, or the Single African Air Transport Market. These are wonderful ideas, wonderful projects that, if implemented, everybody would benefit. But how would you implement a Continental Free Trade Agreement if the capacity to leave from country A to country B within the same day and maybe come back is absent? And why is it absent? Because you have, first of all, very few operators that can do this. And why are there few operators? Because of the challenges of obtaining certain traffic rights, because of this, because of that, because of those things. And so it would be, I think that with the African Union trying to implement most of these objectives, it will be difficult for them to attain them if they don't come back to the basics, get things that are universal, implemented by everybody, and then we can move to the next level. And this is not just about the air transport sector. Like I said before, if you look at issues related to traveling, sometimes the African Union spoke about the necessity to have an African passport. And this was a wonderful idea, and most Africans, most people were ready to have this. Still, you have just a few countries that are ready to move to the next level to implement this and make things move. And the moment you cannot have a passport, or the moment that an African who has to travel needs visas for almost every country, and an operator that has to operate needs authorization, operating licenses, this and that from different countries, there are huge obstacles for development. And, as investors, one of the things that investors want to do is to make decisions at inflection points, because this is when they see the opportunity and this is when they want to gain. But you cannot do this if you have to go through all these administrative processes in different countries. And I can assure you that most of these administrative processes usually do not add much to the safety of the air transport sector. Of course, it's just an issue of administration. It's for sovereignty, for the pride of a country. But we think that for the African Union to move forward and obtain their objectives that they have, that is make Africans to trade amongst themselves, make people to travel within Africa, then they need to upgrade the air transport sector. And of course, the economy of these countries, of most African countries, cannot grow if the air transport sector is not working. Because the air transport sector is just one form of transport that is existing. The other forms of transport in Africa are very, very lacking. We don't have railways in Africa. We don't have trams. We don't have seaways, sea routes that can take people from one place to the other. And so the easiest and the most affordable means of transportation is air transport. And with air transport, if we succeed to have a unique organ where the standards are the same, of course, the next thing that would happen is that the taxation system that is applied to air transportation, the taxes in different countries, the charges that are applied would definitely fall. And when this falls, it means that air tickets will also reduce. And when this reduces, it means more people will travel. And when more people travel, it means volumes. And that is, of course,
and then it means profitability for the airlines as well. It means more money for the airports because they have more passengers coming through, opportunities to make ancillary revenue. I mean, we know, that is absolutely the end goal. And I think the way I would look at today is what you've kind of said is there's that if we can get a uniform approach to kind of compliance and safety, then that just sits within the air transport industry. But if we can do that, that's a good starting point. The things that we then got into about the sort of SATAM and the AFCA and the AFCFTA and the free movement of people, that's something that it kind of, if we can prove, no, we've managed to get this going within our industry, you can then bring in all the other stakeholders. And maybe there's a task force, maybe that exists already at the AU level where the people in charge of those pillars of the 2063 agenda are basically meeting together and saying, right, how can you work with us? Because like you said, AFCFTA isn't going to work unless you can go to that country and trade without having to pay for a visa or having to, the air operator can't get a license to be able to fly, and can't get the traffic right. The whole thing falls apart because of things out of their control. So we all have to work together. But I think that the starting point makes a lot of sense. And we'll definitely be sharing this podcast with the guys at AFCAC and IATA and the AU and AFRA and all the other associations to get their thoughts on this as well. And I think that, it's a great talking point, and you put some practical points to us together. So thank you for joining us, Moses. And we'll put a link to the article in the show notes as well. But anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to the second part of the last question, I think I didn't talk about.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Sponsoring this, exactly. It's obvious that this is a project that would require a lot of resources, would require a lot of technical know-how, and would need a dedicated team of people working on this. And I think there are already people working at the African Union on this. But in order for the African Union to attain its objective of 2063 or whatsoever, they have to do certain things. And I think that we have in Africa some institutions that are conscious of the importance of air transport in Africa, who are also conscious about the importance of safety of air transport in Africa. I'm thinking about this, I'm talking about the African Development Bank, and they have a project to empower most African operators and also the civil aviation sector in Africa. And so they can sponsor this project, of course, under the canopy of the African Union and with support from the International Civil Aviation Authority. I also know that There are projects from the World Bank for most African countries, their civil aviation authorities, on how they can implement safe and acceptable standards and oversight procedures. So I think that we have, if this project is well developed and the African Union takes the lead, we have bilateral and multilateral organs that are ready to sponsor, but this must come under the African Union, because it has to be a Pan-African thing for the African people to help Africa grow.
Absolutely. And I think, to your point, without safety, we don't have an air transport industry. That is the absolute prerequisite. And Africa has been fantastic in keeping keeping those incidents down. And obviously, the longer that happens, the better, because that is an absolute bedrock for any sort of aviation development on the continent at all. So I think, you've given us some great insight. As I say, the link to both Moses's link for his profile on LinkedIn, so you can connect with him, will be in the show notes, and also a direct link to the article that he's written. So please do get involved in the conversation, get commenting on there, reach out to him. He's got some great ideas, and obviously his passion has come through today. I'm hoping I'll be there with you in Madagascar very soon, Moses, but, keep up the good work over there and keep this message going, and we'll keep spreading it. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. It was an honor. And I truly enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. And I hope people who will be able to read the article or listen to the podcast would understand that it is important for Africa to take this step forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I echo that indeed. So if you did enjoy this episode, please, or you think there's somebody in your network that really should listen to it and really spend that time, pour themselves a cup of coffee and really sort of digest what's being said, do click that share button now, send it over to them on WhatsApp or email, whatever you want to do. It's free to listen to wherever they want to consume it. And if you did enjoy it as well, do leave us a review in the App Store. It would be great for us. It allows more people to find us as well, if we've got some nice 5-star reviews in there. We've got plenty more insightful podcasts planned. We've got lots coming up over the coming weeks. We're not going anywhere, even though this is episode 173. We're committed to supporting African aviation to develop itself as it looks to the future. And there is some great news coming out at the moment of borders reopening and airlines restarting. But of course, there's also a fair share of difficult times as well. So we will continue to help African aviation innovate, unite, and thrive. And we will see you all for the next episode very soon. Thanks for joining us.